Child screams in the street, and Millionaire hears. Without knowing, his response changes both their destinies. Confined to a wheelchair, he can't run, but something in that sound compels him to act. The next morning, the same child knocks at his door with a look he swears he's seen before. Gradually, forgotten secrets begin to emerge, and the truth could shake everything he's built. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us what city you're watching from. We continue. I promise this will be the best story you'll hear in your life. The rain beat against the mansion windows with irritating persistence. Richard Harrison adjusted the blanket over his legs and watched the drops running down the glass, forming small rivers that were lost in the darkness of night. At 52, this man who once commanded a business empire now spent his days contemplating the movement of water on the window as if it were the most fascinating spectacle in the world. 6 months had passed since the accident. 6 months since. His life had been divided into 2 distinct periods, before and after the wheelchair. The before consisted of executive meetings, decisions that moved millions, international travel, and the power to change destinies with a simple signature. The after was silence, solitude, and the occasional company of nurses who fulfilled their protocols with professional efficiency and emotional distance. The 3-story house, which was once the stage for elegant dinners and business meetings, now echoed only with the sound of Richard's own thoughts. The staff had been dismissed, except for Mary, who came 3 times a week for cleaning, and the nurse John, who appeared every morning for basic medical care. Both kept conversations minimal and professional, as if Richard were more a function to be fulfilled than a person. That Thursday night, Richard had spent the entire day reviewing financial documents, more out of habit than necessity. His lawyers and administrators took care of everything with precision. He was ironically dispensable in his own empire. The irony didn't escape him. He had built such an efficient machine that it functioned perfectly without him. The sound of rain was interrupted by something different. A scream, sharp, desperate, cutting through the monotony of the night like a blade. Richard raised his head, concentrating. For a moment, he thought he had imagined it. But then the sound repeated. Closer, clearer. It was a child's voice. Propelling his wheelchair to the office window, Richard pushed aside the curtains and tried to see through the rain. The street, normally deserted at this hour, showed a scene that made his heart race. A girl, probably no more than 8 years old, was running along the wet sidewalk while a man pursued her. Even from a distance, Richard could see the desperation in the child's movements, the way she stumbled and got up, always trying to maintain distance from the adult following her. The man caught up with the girl near the mansion gate. Richard saw when he grabbed her by the arm and shook her violently. The scream she let out was like a punch to his stomach. For years, Richard had prided himself on his ability to remain neutral in situations, to not let emotions compromise rational decisions. But there, at that moment, something primitive and urgent took hold of him. Without thinking twice, he picked up the phone and dialed his private security guard, Mike, who lived a few blocks away. Mike, I need you to come here right now. Emergency. Are you okay, sir? Did something happen? There's a child being assaulted in front of my house. Come quickly. While waiting, Richard kept his eyes fixed on the scene outside. The man had dragged the girl under an awning, apparently trying to protect himself from the rain. She had stopped screaming, but Richard could see that she was hunched over, trying to make herself small. The child's posture awakened a painful memory in him, himself at 7, hunched in a corner while his father shouted at his mother. Mike arrived in less than 10 minutes, using the key Richard had given him for emergencies. He was a tall, strong ex-policeman whom Richard had hired years ago for his personal security. Now he would be the arms and legs that Richard couldn't use. "Did you see what happened, sir?" Mike asked, already heading for the door. "They're there under the awning. She hasn't stopped crying. He hurt her, I'm sure." Mike went out into the rain and Richard followed him through the window. He saw when the security guard approached the man and the girl, saw the ensuing argument, saw the moment when the man, clearly intimidated by Mike's presence, released the child and began to walk rapidly in the opposite direction. The girl stood still where she was, as if she didn't know what to do with the sudden freedom. Mike knelt down and talked with her for a few minutes. Richard couldn't hear the words, but he could see the security guard's gentle gestures, the way he extended his hand to the child, how he waited patiently until she accepted his help. When Mike entered the house again, he was holding the girl by the hand. Richard had never seen such a wet and frightened child. Her brown hair was stuck to her face, her clothes soaked and dirty. She couldn't have been more than 8 or 9 years old, too thin for her age, with large dark eyes that seemed to occupy half of her small face. "She says she has nowhere to go," Mike explained. "The man was her stepfather. Apparently her mother left a few days ago and hasn't come back." Richard looked at the girl, who avoided his gaze by fixing her eyes on the floor. She was trembling, but not just from cold. It was the tremor of someone who had gone through something traumatic, of someone who doesn't know if the next adult will be kind or violent. "What's your name?" Richard asked, softening his voice in a way he hadn't done for years. The girl slowly raised her eyes as if assessing whether it was safe to answer. "Emily," she murmured. "Emily. Pretty name." Richard looked at Mike. "Did you call the police?" "I thought it better to talk to you first. The stepfather ran off as soon as he saw me, and she," Mike lowered his voice, "she's very afraid of going anywhere with strangers." Richard observed Emily again. She had found a way to make herself even, smaller, hugging her own body for warmth and protection. Something in that gesture touched a part of Richard that had been buried for decades beneath layers of pragmatism and emotional detachment. "Mary kept some of my niece's clothes in the attic," said Richard. "They should fit her. Mike, can you get something dry? And maybe prepare some hot chocolate?" In the minutes that followed, Richard and Emily were left alone in the living room. The silence was heavy, full of unspoken words and unprocessed traumas. Richard didn't know how to talk to a child. His life had been dedicated to business, and even when he was married, he and his ex-wife never had children. Children were unknown territory to him. "Are you hungry?" he tried. Emily nodded slightly, still avoiding looking directly at him. "Mike will prepare something hot. You'll be okay now, Emily. No one's going to hurt you here." For some reason he couldn't explain, making this promise to her was important. Perhaps because for a long time no one had needed his protection, or perhaps because for the first time in months he felt useful again. When Mike returned with dry clothes and a steaming mug of chocolate, Emily accepted everything with a silent gratitude that broke Richard's heart. She changed in the bathroom and returned wearing a pink t-shirt that was much too big and pants that needed to be folded several times at the cuffs. "Better now?" Richard asked. Emily nodded, and for the first time showed something that almost looked like a smile. "Thank you," she said softly. That simple word reverberated in Richard's chest with a force he hadn't experienced in years. When was the last time someone had thanked him for something truly important? When was the last time he had felt necessary to someone? Dawn brought with it a reality that Richard hadn't considered the night before. Emily had slept on the living room sofa, wrapped in a blanket that Mary had left, and now she was awake, sitting on the floor watching Richard eat the breakfast that Nurse John had prepared. "Good morning," said Richard, not quite sure how to start a morning conversation with a child who had literally appeared in his life during a storm. Emily responded with an almost imperceptible nod of her head. She had found one of the art books that Richard kept on the low shelf in the living room and was leafing through the pages with excessive care, as if afraid of damaging something valuable. John, a middle-aged man who had been caring for Richard for 4 months, observed the situation with evident discomfort. "Mr. Harrison, don't you think you should call Child Protective Services? The girl needs proper care from people specialized in children." Richard looked at Emily, who pretended not to hear the conversation, but he noticed how her shoulders tensed. "She's being well cared for here for now," replied Richard. "There's no rush." "But sir, you have no experience with children, and considering your current situation—" "My current situation allows me plenty of free time," Richard cut in, with a tone he hadn't used for months. It was the voice of the businessman who didn't tolerate questioning. "The girl stays." John didn't insist, but Richard could see the disapproval on his face. After the nurse finished the routine procedures and left, Richard was alone with Emily for the first time in daylight. She seemed smaller and more fragile, with the clarity fully revealing her condition. The borrowed clothes were much too big, her hair needed to be properly brushed, and there were small scratches on her arms that Richard hadn't noticed the night before. "Are you hungry?" he asked. Emily nodded. "Do you know how to prepare anything? I'm not very skilled in the kitchen currently." To his surprise, Emily got up and walked to the kitchen as if she knew the house. Richard followed her, curious to see what she would do. The girl opened some cabinets, examined the contents, and with practical movements began to prepare sandwiches. She needed to use a chair to reach the higher things, but clearly knew what she was doing. "You're used to cooking," observed Richard. "My mum worked a lot. I made the food when she wasn't there." It was the first personal information that Emily shared. Richard treasured each word as if it were precious. "And the man from last night?" Emily stopped spreading butter on the bread for a moment. "He arrived 3 months ago. My mum said he was going to take care of us, but he just yelled. When she left for work and didn't come back, he got really angry with me." The simplicity with which she described the situation broke Richard's heart. A child shouldn't have to deal with abandonment and violence as if they were normal things in life. "Did your mother say when she would return?" "She left on Monday morning. Said she was going to look for a better job in a faraway city. Said she'd be back in a few days, but it's been a week." Richard did the math mentally. Emily had spent an entire week under the care of a violent man, waiting for a mother who would probably never return. The miracle was that she had managed to escape. They spent the rest of the morning in a strange but not uncomfortable companionship. Emily finished preparing the sandwiches and brought them to Richard with the care of someone who was used to serving adults. She ate in silence, but Richard noticed that she ate slowly, savoring each bite as if she didn't know when the next meal would be. "You can eat as much as you want here," said Richard. "You don't need to save." Emily looked at him with an expression that mixed gratitude and disbelief, as if offers of kindness were traps in her life experience. During the afternoon, Richard needed to make some work calls. He expected Emily to get bored, but she found entertainment in the simplest things. She leafed through books, observed the plants on the veranda, and at one moment that made Richard smile. She talked quietly to one of the paintings on the wall, as if the painted person could hear her. "That's my great-grandmother," Richard explained when he noticed that Emily was particularly interested in the portrait of an elderly lady in a blue dress. "She built this house more than 100 years ago." "She looks kind," Emily said, lightly touching the golden frame. "She was. She took care of everyone who needed help. My mother said our house was always full of people who needed assistance." Richard didn't know why he had shared that information. It had been years since he had talked about his great-grandmother, or about the times when that house was full of life and generosity. Perhaps Emily's presence was awakening memories that he had buried along with his emotions. Late in the afternoon, Mary arrived for one of her cleaning visits and stopped at the living room door, clearly surprised to see Emily sitting on the floor drawing on a piece of paper she had found. "Mr. Harrison, who is the girl?" "Emily, she's going to stay with us for a while." Mary, a practical 50-year-old woman who had worked for Richard for more than a decade, didn't ask questions. She had seen many changes in her employer's life and had learned that he didn't like to explain his decisions. Instead, she addressed Emily directly. "Hi, dear. What a pretty drawing you're making." Emily showed the paper. It was a simple, but careful drawing of the room where they were, with Richard in his wheelchair and herself sitting on the floor. In the drawing, they were both smiling. "Can I hang it on the refrigerator?" Mary asked. Emily nodded shyly, and Richard felt something strange in his chest upon seeing her drawing being treated as something important enough to be displayed. That night, after Mary left, Richard faced a practical question. Where would Emily sleep? The living room sofa wasn't suitable for a child to spend many nights, and he couldn't simply pretend that the situation was temporary forever. "Emily, would you like to have your own room here in the house?" The girl's eyes widened. "Can I really?" Of course, there's a room on the second floor that I don't use. We can fix it up for you. The impossibility of climbing the stairs to show Emily the room frustrated him deeply. For months, he had adapted to living only on the ground floor of the house, but now he desperately wished he could guide her up the stairs, help her choose where to put her non-existent things. "Tomorrow Mary can help you look at the rooms and choose the one you like best," he said, trying to hide his frustration. "You won't see it with me?" Emily's innocent question was a cruel reminder of his limitations, but when he looked at her, he didn't see pity in her eyes, just genuine curiosity. "I can't climb stairs with this chair," Richard explained, touching the wheels. "Why do you use a wheelchair?" The direct question caught him off guard. Adults usually avoided the subject or talked about it in hushed voices, as if his condition were something shameful or contagious. "I had an accident. My legs don't work like they used to." Emily processed the information with the naturalness of children. "But your arms work, right?" "Yes." "Then you can teach me to write better. My teacher said my handwriting is ugly." The abrupt change of subject and the way Emily immediately found something Richard could do for her, instead of focusing on what he couldn't, touched him deeply. "I can teach you. Do you like to write?" "I like to write stories, but I don't know many words yet." Richard smiled genuinely for the first time in months. "Then we have a lot of work ahead of us." That night, Richard stayed awake for hours after Emily fell asleep on the sofa. He couldn't stop thinking about how her presence had changed the energy of the house in just one day. The silences were no longer heavy, they were peaceful. The hours no longer dragged, they passed with purpose. For the first time since the accident, Richard fell asleep, feeling that the next day might bring something beyond just more of the same. 3 weeks had passed since Emily's arrival, and Richard's mansion had transformed in a way he never thought possible. What was once a silent mausoleum now resonated with laughter, incessant questions, and the constant noise of small feet running through the corridors. Emily had chosen the blue room on the second floor, which had a view of the garden. Richard would never be able to see how the decoration that Mary had helped the girl organize turned out. But every morning, Emily came down to tell him details: where she had placed the new books Richard had bought for her, how she had organized the clothes Mary had brought from church donations, and especially how she had hung on the wall the first drawing she had made in the house, the one where the two of them were smiling together in the living room. Mornings became Richard's favorite time. Emily woke up early, came down the stairs making as little noise as possible so as not to wake him, and prepared breakfast for the two of them. She had become surprisingly competent in the kitchen, creating simple but tasty recipes that Richard never imagined he could appreciate so much. "Good morning, Richard," she said every morning, bringing a tray with coffee, toast, and some fruit that she had learned to cut into fun shapes. "Good morning, Emily. How did you sleep?" "Well, I dreamed I was teaching you to walk again." Comments like these became common. Emily didn't see Richard's disability as something permanent or limiting. For her, it was just a temporary obstacle that could be overcome with patience and effort. This innocent but persistent perspective began to shake the convictions Richard had built about his new reality. Their relationship developed a comfortable routine. After breakfast, Richard helped Emily with her lessons. She hadn't been enrolled in any school since her mother disappeared, so Richard had become her private teacher. He discovered, to his own surprise, that he enjoyed teaching. There was something rewarding in seeing Emily's eyes light up when she finally understood a mathematical concept or managed to write an entire sentence without errors. "You're a good teacher," Emily said one morning, after managing to solve a series of math problems on her own. "Better than Mrs. Wilson at school." "Why do you think that?" "Mrs. Wilson yelled when I got things wrong. You explain again until I understand." Richard realized that the patience he showed with Emily was something he had never had with himself or with other adults. With her, every small progress was worth celebrating. During the afternoons, while Richard took care of business by phone and computer, Emily explored the house. She had become the unofficial curator of the Harrison family history. She knew every painting, every photograph, every valuable object as if they were personal treasures. And most surprisingly, She made Richard remember stories he had forgotten. "Who is this man in the portrait in the dining room?" she asked one day. "My grandfather. He was one of the founders of the bank that our family still owns." "He looks serious. Was he mean?" "No, actually he was very kind. He taught me to fish every weekend when I was small like you." Richard hadn't talked about fishing for decades, but with Emily, these memories seemed to come back naturally, as if she had a magic key to open doors that he had locked a long time ago. It was during one of these afternoons that something extraordinary happened. Richard was reviewing financial reports when he felt something strange in his right leg. A slight tingling, almost imperceptible. At first, he thought it was his imagination. The doctors had been clear. The damage to his spinal cord was irreversible. But the next day the tingling returned, a little stronger. And on the third day, Richard could swear he was able to slightly move the toes on his right foot. He didn't say anything to anyone. The last thing he wanted was to create false hopes or, worse, be taken for crazy. But he started paying more attention to the sensations in his legs, trying small movements when he was alone. Emily, with the keen perception of children, noticed that something had changed. "You're happier today," she observed during lunch. "You are. Your eyes are different, shining more." Her ability to read his emotions constantly surprised him. How could an 8-year-old be so perceptive? "Maybe it's because I'm enjoying having you here," Richard answered honestly. "I like being here too. Can I stay forever?" The question that Richard knew would eventually come. Legally, Emily couldn't simply stay indefinitely, but the idea of losing her had become unthinkable. "Do you want to stay?" "I want to. Here nobody yells at me, and you teach me interesting things, and Mary makes cake." The simplicity of her reasons moved him. Emily didn't want to stay because of the luxury of the house or the expensive things. She wanted to stay because she felt safe and valued. "Then we'll find a way for you to stay." That night, Richard called his personal lawyer, William, who had been handling family matters for more than 20 years. "William, I need to know about adoption." "Adoption? Richard, are you serious?" "Completely serious. There's a child living with me, an 8-year-old. Girl who needs a family. I want to adopt her." "Richard, that's a very big decision. Are you sure you're thinking clearly? Your current situation, the wheelchair, the solitude. Sometimes we make emotional choices when we're vulnerable." "I'm not vulnerable. William, for the first time in months, I'm thinking clearly. This girl needs me and I need her. It's as simple as that. Nothing is simple when it comes to adoption. There are psychological evaluations, social studies, visits from Child Protective Services. And considering your physical disability, the process might be even more complicated. Then we start the process tomorrow. You know the best family lawyers in the city. Hire whoever is necessary." After hanging up the phone, Richard realized the magnitude of the decision he had just made. He was proposing to be the father of a child he barely knew, he who had never shown aptitude or interest in children. But when he looked at Emily's drawing hanging on the living room wall, now she had made a collection of them, he knew he had made the right decision. In the days that followed, Richard began to see Emily from a different perspective. No longer as a temporary guest, but as his potential daughter. He observed how she ate, how she reacted to different situations, what kind of activities made her happy. He was studying her, preparing to be the best possible father for her. Emily, apparently, was also going through a transformation. She had become more communicative, asking questions about everything: why the sky was blue, how telephones worked, why Richard didn't have a wife. "Are married people happier?" she asked one day out of nowhere. "Some are, others aren't. Why do you want to know?" "Because you seem lonely sometimes, even when you're with me." The observation caught him off guard. It was true that decades of emotional isolation didn't disappear overnight, even with Emily's company. "Being alone for a long time leaves marks," Richard explained. "But you're helping me remember how good it is to have someone around. Do you want me to be your family?" The direct question, asked with the brutal innocence of children, made Richard's heart race. "I would like that very much. And you? Would you like me to be your family?" Emily smiled in a way that Richard had never seen before. It was a complete smile, one that lit up her entire face and made her eyes dance. Yes, I want that a lot. That night, Richard felt the tingling in his legs again, stronger this time. And when he tried to move his toes, he was sure he had succeeded. It was just a minimal movement, but it was movement. Perhaps, thought Richard, miracles came in different sizes. Some were little girls who appeared during storms. Others were muscles that began to respond after months of silence. All of them precious, all of them capable of changing an entire life. 2 months after Emily's arrival, Richard's life had acquired a routine he never imagined possible. The adoption process was underway, with evaluations and interviews that Richard faced with the determination of a man who knew exactly what he wanted. But none of these bureaucratic changes compared to the transformation he felt in his own body. The tingling in his legs had gradually intensified, evolving into small muscle spasms that his doctor, Dr. Thompson, classified as residual reflexes, without clinical significance. But Richard knew there was something more happening. He could move his toes with more ease each day, and on some mornings he had the impression he could feel the light touch of the blankets on his legs. Emily, with her childlike ability to perceive subtle changes, began to make comments that left Richard simultaneously hopeful and fearful. "You look taller today," she said during breakfast on a Tuesday. "How so taller? I'm sitting in the same chair." "I don't know. You're different, more present." Richard didn't know how to interpret observations like this, but he began to pay more attention to his own body posture. Maybe Emily was right. Maybe he was carrying himself differently, more upright, more confident. It was on a Thursday afternoon that the revelation came in a completely unexpected way. Richard was in his office talking on the phone with a client when Emily came running in, clearly agitated. "Richard! Richard! There's a man at the door who says he's my father." Richard's heart stopped. He immediately hung up the phone and followed Emily to the living room, where he found a man of unkempt appearance with dirty clothes and the smell of alcohol, accompanied by a social worker. "You must be the guy who's taking care of my daughter," said the man with an arrogance that made Richard grip the arms of his wheelchair. The social worker, a young woman with a professional air, addressed Richard. "Mr. Harrison, I'm Sarah Johnson, from Child Protective Services. This is Robert Miller, who claims to be Emily's biological father. He is requesting custody of the child." Richard looked at Emily, who was glued to his side, clearly frightened. The man in front of him didn't look anything like her, but that meant nothing in legal terms. "Emily never mentioned having a father," Richard said calmly, though inside he was panicking. "Of course she has a father. I'm her father. I was traveling for work, and when I came back I discovered she had disappeared. I've been searching for weeks until I found out she was here." "I don't know this man," Emily murmured softly to Richard, clutching the arm of his chair. "Of course you know me. You were little when I left, but I'm your father, and now I've come to get you." The social worker looked uncomfortable with the situation. "Mr. Harrison, you understand that if he is indeed the biological father, he will have legal rights over the child. We need to do some tests and verifications, but—" "You don't need any tests," Robert interrupted. "She's my daughter and I want her back. This rich man has no right to keep her just because he has money." Richard felt a fury growing inside him, a protective anger he hadn't known before Emily entered his life. And where were you when Emily was being abused by her stepfather? Where were you when she needed protection, food, a safe place to sleep? "That's none of your business. She's my daughter." "No, she isn't." The voice came from behind all of them. Mary was at the entrance to the living room with a determined expression that Richard had never seen before. "What did you say?" Robert turned to her aggressively. "I said she isn't your daughter, because I've known Emily since she was 2 years. "Hold." Richard looked at Mary in surprise. She had never mentioned knowing Emily before. "Mary?" Richard asked. "Mr. Richard, I didn't say anything before because I didn't want to complicate things, but I knew Emily when I worked for a family in the neighborhood where she lived with her mother. Her mother, Lisa, always told me that Emily didn't have a father. She said that the father ran away when he found out about the pregnancy and never contacted them again. For that's a lie, Robert shouted. It's not a lie, Mary continued calmly, and this man here isn't the Robert Miller that Lisa knew. The Robert Miller was blonde, short, and had a large tattoo on his left arm. This man here is trying to pass himself off as Emily's father, probably because he heard she's being adopted by a wealthy family. The social worker looked at Robert with growing suspicion. Sir, can you prove your identity? Do you have documents that prove your relationship with the child? Robert began to stutter, clearly nervous. The documents are... I lost them during my trip. Emily, Richard said softly, do you remember ever meeting this man before? Emily shook her head vigorously. I've never seen him before. And my mom always said that my father left before I was born and that I shouldn't expect him to come back. The social worker was clearly convinced of the fraud. Mr. Robert, or whoever you are, I'll need you to come with me to the police station. Attempting to defraud an adoption process is a serious crime. Robert still tried to argue, but when he saw that the situation was lost, he ran out of the house, leaving everyone surprised by his cowardice. After the social worker left, assuring that the adoption process would continue without interference, Richard found himself alone with Emily and Mary in the living room. Mary, why did you never tell me you knew Emily? Mary sighed. Because when I saw her here, I thought it was just a coincidence, but when I began to see how you two cared for each other, I decided not to interfere. You two needed each other, and when I saw that you wanted to adopt her officially, I knew it was the right thing. Emily always deserved a real family. Richard looked at Emily, who was calmer now that the danger had passed. Did you know that Mary already knew you? I thought her face was familiar, but I wasn't sure. But it doesn't matter. Even if that man was my real father, I didn't want to go with him. I want to stay here with you. Emily's simple declaration touched Richard deeply. It was choice, not obligation, that united them. That night, after Emily went up to her room, Richard decided it was time to share his secret. He had been able to move his legs during the entire episode with the fake father, and now he was sure that his recovery was real. Emily, he called when she came down to say goodnight. Yes. Remember when you said you dreamed of teaching me to walk again? I remember. I want to try something. Can you help me? Emily approached, curious. Richard took a deep breath and, concentrating all his strength, tried to stand up from the chair. He couldn't completely, but his legs responded in a way that hadn't happened for months. Richard, Emily exclaimed, you moved your legs. Come help me. Support my arm. With Emily as support, Richard managed to stand up from the chair for a few seconds before needing to sit down again. Both were panting as if they had just completed a marathon. You're getting better, Emily shouted with joy. I knew it. I always knew you would be able to walk again. Tears ran down Richard's face, not just for the physical recovery, but for the realization that Emily had been the catalyst for all the positive changes in his life. Her presence, her unwavering faith, her unconditional love had awakened in him the desire to fight again. 3 months later, Richard was taking his first steps without support in the garden of the house, with Emily applauding every movement. The adoption process had been officially completed, and Emily Harrison, she had chosen to keep the surname, was legally his daughter. Daddy, Emily said one day, using for the first time the word that both had been avoiding, do you think my biological mother would be happy to know that I found a family? Richard, who now walked with the aid of a cane but walked, bent down to be at eye level with her. I'm sure any mother would be proud to see the brave and loving girl you've become, and I'm sure she would be happy to know that you are safe and loved. And you? Are you happy that I'm your daughter? Richard smiled, a smile that came from the bottom of his heart. Emily, you saved my life in a way you can't imagine. You brought purpose, joy, and love to an existence that was empty. I'm not just happy that you're my daughter. I'm grateful every day for that scream in the rain that made me look out the window. Emily hugged him tightly, and Richard realized that he had found something that no amount of money could buy. A true family, built not by blood but by choice, care, and genuine love. In the garden of the house that had been silent for so long, father and daughter walked together under the afternoon sun, building memories that would last forever. Richard had learned that sometimes miracles arrive in the form of a child lost in the rain, and that true love has the power not only to heal broken hearts, but also to make muscles work again and men walk again. The end of the story. Dear listeners, we hope that the story of Richard and Emily has touched your hearts the same way it touched ours. This is proof that family is not defined only by blood ties, but by bonds of love, care, and mutual choice. To continue this emotional journey with us, we've prepared a special playlist with equally touching stories that you'll find right here. If this story moved you as much as it moved us to tell it, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and leave your like on this video. Every day we bring narratives that celebrate the strength of human love and the capacity for transformation that we all carry within us. Don't miss our upcoming content and tell us in the comments, what was the moment that moved you the most